and it was one of those things that by the time he wrote his account, the war had ended, and people were starting to understand what had been done to the cities of Germany, what had been, what the casualty rates were among the bomber crews and stuff like that. And kind of the bloom fell off the rose, and you could see a shift from where for a long time the men of Bomber Command were seen as being the only ones that were carrying the battle to the Germans and carrying the battle to the continent. But after the war, as people started to look at what really happened, they started to kind of tended to not want to look too closely at what happened in Bomber Command. So when they wanted to talk about the RAF, they would talk about the men of Fighter Command. So then, this is where you see where like Churchill's comment about the pilots who flew in the Battle of Britain and stuff like that. So Arthur Harris, he fought the war and he had a lot of popular support during that time. But as the war was coming to an end, he kind of came under a cloud. But this is an excellent book, and it's got a lot of tables and like figures and statistics in there. And so for anyone, who's interested in the RAF campaign, I really recommend this. So if you go to the next slide, this was the official British history of the strategic air offensive against Germany. As you can see, it's in 4 volumes, and it came out in, I think, 1960, 1961. And for the first time, you start to see references to a document called SD-98. And at that time, that was all classified information. The authors of this series had access to the Air Ministry documents that were still classified, but they couldn't discuss them a lot. So you would see them with tables and charts where they talk about data from SD-98, and they quoted Arthur Harris, where he was talking about planning the destruction of the cities in Germany, and he was referring to numbers from SD-98. And so the question is, well, what in the heck is SD-98? When I was starting to do work on my thesis, I talked to a retired Canadian military historian that was very influential in the Department of Defense and the Library and Archives section in there. And I asked him, I said, do you know anything about SD-98? He said, never heard of it. So I told him, I says, well, there's references to this, and there was an American historian by the name of Robin. His name just escapes me right off the bat. But he was interested in logistics, and he wrote a paper that talked about SD-98, but he looked at it from the logistics point of view. So this gentleman that I was referring to, this retired historian that had studied in the RCAF history, he sent me an email that he'd addressed 7 different retired historians, and some of these were very prominent names in the RCAF history, and asked them what do they know about SD-98, and none of them had seen the documents, none of them had heard of it. Some of them remembered that this American historian had referenced it in terms of logistics, but they didn't really understand what is this document. And it amazed me because it played such a fundamental role. And when the RCAF official history for the Second World War came out, there's no reference to SD-98 at all. Which, so if you haven't heard of it, what does it mean? So if you go to the next slide, what happened is that they started using data in the 1920s and 30s with the Royal Air Force, and what it would take to fight a war. And so in 1936, there was a document that was published, and it was called Data for Calculating Consumption and Wastage in War. And this was a 3rd edition that's in there, and it was referred to as Secret Document 98 or SD-98. So the thing about it is when you look at the tables and charts that they've got in this series, it's really a book of charts. It's kind of like a manual for planning an air offensive. Where you can calculate how many bullets you need, how many gallons of gas, how many airplanes you're going to need, what kind of resistance are you going to encounter, so what kind of loss rates are you expecting, and that. But the thing about it is it's a document that describes planning for a war of attrition. At the same time, the military leaders in the RAF and, you know, coincidentally in the Army Air Forces in the United States, they were talking about how they were going to defeat civilian morale, and this could be done painlessly, and we wouldn't have to worry about the wars of attrition, and we wouldn't, you know, the Western Front would be, you know, we wouldn't have to worry about anything like that. But in the meantime, the planners in the Air Ministry were sitting there planning for a war of attrition, and they were laying it out exactly as it would be fought. And it turned out that a lot of their documents, when you look at various editions from 1936 to 1943, they were very close to the actual numbers that the RAF suffered. So if you go to the next slide, these are the covers of two of the editions. The one on the left is the 1936 edition. The one on the right is the 1943 edition. If you look, you can see that they were classified. The one on the left, I think, shows 1974. And the one on the right, it was classified till 1979. And so, you know, what is it that would be so secretive in these documents that are just basically charts and tables that they would want to keep them from the public? So if you go to the next slide, this is from the 1943 SD98, and this is table number 7 on page 13, and they're talking about rates of aircraft wastage. So if you look down on under heavy bombers on the, you know, lower middle page, you see penciled in Lancaster and Halifax, and they talk about the number of operational sorties per FB wastage. FB is flying battle. So they're talking about how many missions a bomber could expect to last before it would be declared wastage. Now, there's a fudge factor in there. So if you look to the right, it says %WO, and that would be the number of aircraft that would be expected to be written off as a result of this you know, being declared wastage. And they knew they could repair some of them, but they couldn't repair all of them. So they're estimating it in this document here. What you're looking at is 70% of the aircraft that were damaged in flying battle would have to be written off. Then the next column over, they have flying accidents. And they're saying the number of non-operational hours of flying time per flying accident wastage, and they're looking at 200 hours, and 35% of them are going to be written off. So then to the right, they talk about the gross, and they're saying that the operational sorties per gross wastage is 16. They expect you to get 16 missions out of an aircraft, and the percent written off would be 63%. Well, they're asking crews here to fly these aircraft, knowing that they're going to end up, you know, lasting for 16 missions, and 63% are going to be written off. So when you reverse calculate it, it works out to 22 or 23 missions. But the combat tour for the RAF air crew was 2 operational tours, and after March of 1943. They had to do 50 operations. So they're asking these air crew to do 50 operations when they're expecting to write off all of these aircraft after 22 or 23 or 24, you know, they call them operations or missions. And that's what makes the SD98 such a chilling thing, is the fact that people, you know, in the Air Ministry, they understood that the casualties were going to be higher than what they were telling the politicians, and they went ahead and did it anyway.
And the planes are not even lasting as long. I mean, the planes are lasting longer than the humans.
Well,
but the humans are being in those or flying in those.
Yeah.
So I mean, yes, okay.